All right, take two. Thank you everyone for coming out. I'm going to be talking about how we can work on automating some malware analysis. The goal being to automate not just the analysis itself, but a lot of the issues that come with threat intelligence, since bothering with threat intelligence whatsoever comes with a fairly steep learning curve. And we'd like to automate a bit more of that. My name is Adam Hogan. I'm currently a sales engineering manager at CrowdStrike. And the appease the corporate overlords, real quick, CrowdStrike is in the endpoint protection business. We're differentiated by doing not just the usual endpoint protection, replacing AV with a machine learning-based protection, but we're also doing EDR. We're doing forensic record of everything that's happening at the endpoint. We do managed hunting, so we actually have people watching that data 24/7 for signs of an advanced attack, or at least one that was not prevented automatically, as well as our services department and our threat intelligence service that we've been selling for about 7 years now. Okay, so through that, what are we actually here to talk about? I want to talk about the rise of the machines learning. Machine learning. So we want to go through that and how it relates to malware workflows, because it's having a fairly significant impact, I think. Right. But say a machine learning algorithm walks into a bar. Bartender says, "What'll it be?" And the machine learning algorithm says, "What's everybody else having?" Right. So, yeah. We'll start light, right? Now everyone's entertained. Quick step back, and at a high level, like what are we talking about with machine learning here? Machine learning is, and let's fill in the blank, is it an overused buzzword? Almost certainly. On the vendor banner, you've had shoved in your face if you've been to the vendor hall. Yeah, that's highly likely. Is it helping our industry? I'd say definitely. I think we've dramatically improved detection rates and certainly speed to detection. Does machine learning hinder us a little as incident responders? Maybe. And that's what I want to dig into for a bit. Machine learning is pretty awesome. The detection it gives us is amazing, but it's a strong silent type, by which I mean we are extraordinarily limited in the output we get from machine learning. Right? We give it all the data we can, and what we get in return is nothing but a number on the unit interval. Right? So number between 0 and 1, and you can scale it, I guess. That's not really important. That's all you're really getting out of machine learning, though. So not very verbose or forthcoming with its decision process or what's going on there. So, okay, hey, this machine learning algorithm, I need your help. What's up with this file? And that's all you get. Right? So not a lot of data. Right? So that's the problem I want to dig into. So the problem statement here, what we really want to talk about, now that we have more and more security technologies relying on machine learning for looking at files, that's driving a bit of a wedge into the incident response process. Yes, machine learning has greatly improved detection efficacy and certainly elasticity. We don't have to wait for someone to write a signature, which relies on someone waiting to get a hold of the sample and doing their analysis and then publishing the signature and you downloading the signature, right? We can cut out all that stuff. So we have dramatically sped up that process. And as far as identifying new threats, new pieces of malware out there, machine learning is way ahead of the curve. But it does make it a little more difficult to identify what is attacking you, since again, that result is not terribly verbose. And of course, it is heavily reliant on static analysis for the instances of speed and getting the results as quickly as possible. It is largely going on the static properties of the file it's analyzing. So if you as an analyst get an alert from a machine learning algorithm that says this file is bad, you naturally have some questions that machine learning doesn't answer for you. You have to stop and think, okay, well, is it targeted or is it commodity? Is this directed directly at me or everybody? Is it trying to destroy my data? Is it going to ransom it back to me? Right? What is this malware trying to do? If it had been successful, what's going on there? Well, what malware family is it a part of? Who wrote it? Is this a botnet everyone's seen before, or is this something brand new? And of course, more importantly, if I get an alert from machine learning 4 o'clock on a Friday, do I have to care? Right? And we're not really getting that kind of data if all we get is it's bad or it's good. There's not less we want along with it. So we end up with a bit of a malware workflow in order to dig into it and try and understand what's the actual problem. And even if malware is being blocked by machine learning, you still have to wonder, like, where'd this come from and how worried should I be about it? So we want to start looking at the workflow an analyst typically goes through, which will often involve, of course, first stopping whatever the threat is, whichever ways you have at your disposal. I happen to prefer doing it at the endpoint with our software, but regardless of that, what we want to do is stop it. We want to acquire the sample so we can take another look at it, do some static analysis, or send it up for like a sandbox detonation, or we can collect more indicators and hopefully give us a better idea of how to stop it, and maybe and provide other instrumentation so we can stop it at the endpoint, at the gateway, at the firewalls, whatever we got. If we can understand the lineage, it's going to help us out a lot. And it doesn't necessarily have to be attribution to a threat actor. Getting the lineage in the sense that I want to know it's a part of a certain malware family. This is the rig exploit kit. That puts you ahead tremendously. Now I can Google rig exploit kit and there's a tremendous wealth of data. I can pivot based on that. I can search based on that. If we know the malware family itself, we are well ahead of the analysis problem here. And of course, if we are doing dynamic analysis, we want to look at what it drops. And try and get a better idea of the family of TTPs the threat actor might be employing here, and then start to build a report on it. And of course, we want to start to automate that because that requires a great deal of experience and knowledge to do. And even if you have that on staff, it requires a great deal of time. All right, so how do we want to do that? So what we've got for that, we're actually rolling out, we're calling FALCON X. It's not, I'm told, a placeholder name, despite its intention. So we're calling it FALCON X. It's not that one, or it's just a little different. That's DMX. We're doing we're doing FALCON X. So we want to take that flow and try and automate it as much as possible. So that as we can map that back, we want to be able to stop it at the endpoint. And again, our machine learning algorithm is what's doing that. It is able to identify some malware, say, okay, this is bad. But what do we do at that point? Well, normally, we'd actually have it in our threat graph. We're able to track the forensic level data, what that file's doing. Only if I already figured out it's bad, we tend to kill and quarantine the file. So I don't have interesting forensic data for you to look at. So instead, we want to send that to a sandbox. We want to be able to run that dynamically. We'll want to be able to turn around and work through the APIs to provide the IOCs associated with it, and frankly, anything else we can learn about it. Go back through our malware database and find more related samples. So once we have a sample, we'll actually take a look at some interesting bits of it, and I'll show examples of this, in order to find related samples. We'll find interesting bits of code, interesting strings, and immediately search our malware database, about a petabyte of malware, and we can search through that and find related samples in a matter of seconds. So as a part of your analysis, we'll be able to give you related samples and again help dig into what's the malware family, what else is going on there. And then, of course, everything that comes from that analysis, the dropped assets in this case being not just files dropped when we dynamically analyze the one file, but now all of the related files we've been able to identify as well. Okay? And this is just a write-out of everything I just went through. We'll skip that. Okay, what we're not doing, and I do want to make this a little bit clear because all of this is centered around the use of our malware sandbox. So I do want to make clear that we are not using a sandbox to determine if a file is malicious. I'll throw that out there because it is a very traditional way to think about using a malware sandbox and detonating malware is, okay, we're going to run this and figure out if it's bad. We're already doing that. We actually think the machine learning is doing a much better and certainly faster job at determining whether the file is malicious or not. That sandbox is, however, a great source of intel. Of a way to dig into what it's trying to do and actually allow us to get more information about what, or if not who, is attacking us. So we can learn a bit more about that malware. And we're doing that with hybrid analysis. Has anyone used hybrid analysis before? Love to see it. Thanks. That's the sandbox engine behind it. And it remains so, of course. So you can check out hybrid-analysis.com. sign up for an account there, and throw up, I want to say 50 files a day to run through the sandbox analysis like we'll be talking about today. So that'll run through a great deal of static analysis, running through the, how the file was built and everything, and of course runs through dynamic analysis. So it opens it in a VM, executes it, watches what it does, so that we can take a look at it. And it actually doubles down then and does another round of static analysis. Because it'll do static analysis on files that are dropped. It'll also do static analysis on memory dumps of the interesting processes that are running. So if things do unfold a bit differently in memory than they are on disk, then we'll continue to get static information on that as well. Which is actually what the word hybrid comes from, doing static and dynamic analysis, and then over and over again. We'll also correlate this with our threat intel. So we've traditionally sold that as a premium feed to get into your SIM or wherever else you might be able to put that data to use, which I'll tell you, as someone who's been selling threat intel, is not the easiest task. Right? There's a lot of people have a hard time putting that data to use and figuring out, how do I make threat intel actionable? So again, if we can automate a big part of that, we're taking out a huge piece of that learning curve. All right, so let's take a look at what that's going to look like. And one of the first examples I have is BitPaymer. And if you haven't heard of this, it's a fairly interesting bit of ransomware. We should tie it back to Indrik Spider if you've seen any of our threat actor information before. And I'll get to why, or at least how, in a moment. A really interesting bit about this ransomware is it's incredibly opportunistic, and it's driven, essentially it's based on price discrimination, which is what I call it, since I was an economics professor for a while. Far more to the point, our threat intel team calls it big game hunting, which means they are targeting their targets, that's terrible phrasing, quite deliberately. Right? This traditional ransomware was spray and pray. Right? Put as much of it out there as possible and hope that that people got infected, and hope they cared enough about their files to pay the price, and hope that you had correctly set the price. So you run into an issue there, because if you were to get, say, a hospital's health record, they're probably a lot more likely to pay a higher price than, say, my grandmother would to recover her photos. So if we can go after the former and ignore the later, we have the opportunity to engage in price discrimination, of course, drive up the profitability of running ransomware in the first place, which is a fairly interesting business model this thing was built on. So start by taking a look at what would be in the day in the life of an analyst, and see, okay, what would this alert look like in CrowdStrike's FALCON console, which is normally will give you, in the process tree here, we can see someone fired up, command.exe and then tried to run this malware. Now, if you've ever seen a standard CrowdStrike demo before, what we would do then is, on the right-hand side, drill into some forensic data. Show you, what files were read and were written, and what network connections were made, and I don't have any of that information. And we take a look at the alert, it actually tells us that, that machine learning has identified this as bad. It stopped it, it quarantined it, which is why I don't have any forensic data. So again, we're right back to that problem of, okay, it's bad and it's been stopped, but how bad is it? So what we want to do is replace, on that right-hand side, scroll down, and instead of getting the forensic data, we can dig into, instead, the sandbox analysis. So this is ported right into the same GUI. And you can still use hybrid analysis. You can still use a private instance of our sandbox. Of course, this is being sent to a private instance. So it is a cloud-based sandbox, but it's private entirely to any given customer that's using it. They're able then to see what we're learning from dynamic analysis. So they get that threat score. They get our determination that it's malicious, and based on that risk assessment there, it'll actually tell you, yeah, we see it fingerprinting the system, getting persistent, and we're able to determine it's ransomware. And of course, from there, you can drill down in the full report. Of course, those of you that had your hands up earlier, we're going to recognize a great deal of this. Aside from the logo change in the upper left, this is the results from hybrid analysis, that sandbox engine. Although we're going to put in some pretty interesting stuff here. The report is built so that you have to read as little of it as possible. We want all the information at a high level to be at the top where we can find it. So here we do see it's malicious. We get its threat score. And if we have enough intel from the community or from our own threat intel, we're going to tag it with the name of the ransomware family, the threat actor, or anything else we know about it. In this case, identifying that this is associated with DRIDEX, that it's ransomware, and so forth. Back out of the top, we have that incident response section, which was the same I saw on the previous screen when we're even looking at the endpoint data. But it is, again, telling us that, hey, it's fingerprinting the system, and it is, in fact, ransomware. But on top of that, we're going to pull in our threat intelligence. So in this case, it is attributing back to that specific threat actor. So I can pivot directly from here to, okay, I want the rest of the intel you have on that threat actor. I want to read the reports you have on them immediately. And of course, any associated other sandbox artifacts. So if you've run related samples, if we have related samples from our own intel that we can provide to you, they'll be listed there. And then we'll go hunting for even more samples. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, that was directed entirely in the wrong direction. Under this section here, it's actually pulling the results from Malquery. So this is pulling from our malware database. Now what it's done is actually pulled out a couple interesting things. One there you see is an interesting string. It's actually the PDB database string, which in and of itself might not be terribly interesting. It depends entirely on how unique that particular string is. But I can tell you that because it searched our malware database. And out of the petabyte of malware we have, only 13 files have that exact string in them. 8 of them we've already analyzed and determined to be malicious. So we'll be able to tell you that. And of course, if I click into that, we'll be able to give you those 13 files. You can download those, or especially the ones that have not yet been determined if they're malicious, flag them and send them right back into the sandbox for their own analysis so we can get a more clear result. And of course, you can do that in bulk to dive into all those related files as well. So the second bit there is actually a bit of code, not a string, but some interesting code that we've determined we're going to want to look into. It searches for that, and we find over 100 different samples that have that bit of code. And if I click into that, again, it's going to show you that list of different ones, or at least this is the first page. I'm not going to go through them all. It's mostly hashes and illegible stuff. But we do see the option on the right-hand side to download the file or send it back to the sandbox for analysis. And you can select all and do it that way as well. But we also have the additional tags we see there, which is pretty interesting because not only in red are we coming back with, oh, here's other samples of BitPayMere. Here's other samples of the same ransomware. But in green, you'll actually see where it's coming back with DRIDEX samples, which is actually how we did the attribution on this. There's code overlap, significant code overlap between the BitPayMere ransomware and the DRIDEX malware. So we actually dig in and see where that's being used, and that's actually been identified here automatically and in a matter of a couple minutes because it was able to key off that semi-unique code and then turn around and search our malware database for it. This, again, if you had your hand up, is going to look awfully familiar. These are the behavioral indicators we're getting from the sandbox. So how we're able to determine what happened from a dynamic standpoint. It can actually go through then and drill into the report and get a whole lot more detail. Or in this case, it's going to be able to show you that, it allocates virtual memory in a remote process. We see it writing data to that process. It creates a resource fork in order to hide that. So we can see it doing some nasty stuff to stealthily get persistent. We determine it's ransomware a few different ways. Here it's actually calling out deleting the volume snapshots, which again, it's got to be more than 90% of malware starts by doing it with a VSS admin, right? Delete all quietly in order to remove the shadow copy. So that in itself is a big tell. Though as we drill into the next page, it's the actual suspicious indicator. So not necessarily malicious, but kind of interesting, something we want to take a closer look at. And in that, we should actually... There we go. We'll have a couple other things there, including that there's a lot of encrypted or packed stuff there, which is what you get from it. It has high entropy sections. That means the data appears to be nearly random. So it's either hiding something on purpose or it's encrypted or packed. We can see it reading the computer name and cryptographic GUID, the installation date and things. So it's actually profiling this machine, which is not something you see in commodity malware outside of botnets. Right? It's telling you the malware actually cares about where it's installed, or it wants to be able to keep track of where it's installed. And then if we dig in the most part, again, we'll get more indicators that it was ransomware because it's dropping a large number of files. It opens a large number of files with deletion rights because, of course, it opens a file, it writes an encrypted copy, then deletes the original. which is enough nuance to sort of key into, like, okay, we see it being opened for deletion there. Yeah, or opens many files for write access. Again, so it's enumerating all the files in the system and goes through and encrypts them. And being able to watch that happen is, of course, enough to come back and say it's ransomware. Whereas a couple minutes ago, all we had was machine learning says it's bad. I can dig into the process tree, which is great. I showed you a process tree of what this happened on the endpoint, but it wasn't at all interesting because it got blocked, it got quarantined. Here we have the process tree from where it ran in the sandbox. So, okay, if I didn't block it, what's going to happen? And now I can dig into what that looks like. So I may get some threat hunting cues directly from this type of data. So we'll see things like, yeah, it is using VSSA. I'm going to delete shadow copies. Maybe I want to search my endpoint logs for that. I may want to see how it runs the subsequent processes, or even things like the net view command. So that's actually it looking for network shares to go and encrypt those files as well. But the net view command, while not at all necessarily malicious, is something I'd probably be interested in if someone's doing that. And if I were to search all my endpoints, I can give you that list of all the endpoints that have run net view command in the past day, past week, whatever. And yeah, there's probably some IT people in that list, but probably sort through that pretty quickly, right? So we've got a bit more to go on based on the dynamic data we've gotten back here. And then I can actually start to dig into the IOCs. Now, I'd like to see the endpoint everywhere and go ahead and take care of protection for you, but that doesn't always happen. So maybe we want to pull IOCs of this type of analysis, and that's very common for when you do have dynamic analysis, right? It's been through the sandbox. I know what it's dropping. I know what it's doing on the endpoint. I want to be able to pull that data back. I want those file hashes, the domains it's calling to, the IPs it's connecting to, whatever they are. Well, we can give you those. And the traditional way of thinking about it, what I learned from sandboxing a piece of malware, is what you get when you download the strict IOCs. But you'll also see an option in there to download the broad IOCs. And that is actually going to take additional data from the other malware samples we have, from the threat intelligence we have. If we are able to correlate that on additional analysis, it's going to add those IOCs to the list as well. So now we're going from, hey, I've got IOCs from one piece of malware analyzed to dozens. And in the case of this particular file that I've been talking about, we actually dramatically increased the, well, not dramatically, because we've got file hashes for everything encrypted, so this number is unusually high, the file hashes it has. We are pulling in a lot more because we were able to do those intel lookups, correlate it with what we know already. Now we can give you the IOCs for not just the one file, but for related ones as well. And if you do get a chance to play with this malware, it was fairly interesting to go through it the first time because the ransom note is fairly specific. It's not addressed to everyone. It doesn't have to explain what a Bitcoin is. Like they know who their target is. Though we do get the Bitcoin addresses, so it's always fun to check how successful malware is being. And this is somewhat out of date because they're using different wallets now. There have actually been subsequent campaigns from the same actor from newer versions of BitPaymer. And I didn't have the Bitcoin wallets for that, so that it's considerably more profitable than I can even show here. But there were a couple of Bitcoin addresses we were able to pull out. One was, hey, send it here. The first one, and we saw about 4 transactions, and when they had amassed about 24.5 Bitcoin. And I don't know how much Bitcoin's fluctuated, but when I first did the math, that was about $164,000 worth. But all of that Bitcoin was moved to another wallet, this one here. Now, I don't know if that's the same threat actor. I don't know if that's a money laundering service or their bookie. But all of the Bitcoin paid in ransom to this address was all moved to the same address. That had a total receipt of well over 6,000 Bitcoin, which ended up translating to about $43 million worth. So it appears that ransomware is still quite profitable. And there's some other IOCs to dig into. You know, when you can go and look at the encrypted files themselves, they have a .locked extension, so the rest are easier to find if you're concerned that it may not have been blocked on the endpoint. The ransom notes have .readme text, and you can download those and take a look at it. Of course, that's where I got the Bitcoin address we can go and search for. And as I said before, it will look at network shares to pull those files. But what it does not have, in stark contrast to most ransomware you may have seen in the past, does not have any ability to self-propagate. It doesn't have any command and control. They know exactly where they're installing it, who they're installing it on, it doesn't have to do random callback because they're really directing the installation of this in the first place, which is easy for them because they already control the DRIDEX botnet. And of course, by that code overlap, we're able to tie that back to the DRIDEX family, and of course, we call it Indrix Spider. And so it's, in CrowdStrike's naming scheme. Excuse me. Next example I want to look at is a piece of malware that ties back to a threat actor we track as BERSERK Bear. So this one is tied back to the Russian government. BERSERK Bear is a little different than the ones that have been typically making the news lately, in that they are going after industrial controls and engineering companies. So they've really been digging into that, and that's very much the targets that they have on their plate. This particular malware called GrrCon, that's how I'm pronouncing it. God knows how everyone else pronounces it. If you heard it a different way, I apologize. But that's how I'm sounding that out. It's actually used in their operation to regain control. Mostly when they first own a box, they'll steal the credentials, and they'll log right back in directly. And it's actually only if that stops working, they'll end up using this malware to sort of get back in and use that as a backdoor. And once again, if I look at that in the endpoint console, I don't learn a whole lot. Yeah, I saw Explorer launch this file. It was blocked and in quarantine. I haven't learned much about it. Machine learning says it's bad. I know it's been stopped, and that's good, but how much do I worry about it? And how do you distinguish this from something far less interesting? Well, again, this was automatically extracted from the endpoint, sent to a private sandbox. And we've got these results back where we have a behavioral threat score of 100 out of 100, and we're able to pull back a risk assessment that says, yeah, it's actually providing remote access, and we see it fingerprinting the system. So we are looking at a bit of command and control out of this piece of malware. And if we drill into that full report, again, you'll recognize the sort of hybrid analysis layout here. We can pull back and see not only that we think it's malicious, the threat score is 100 out of 100, but we do also, again, get a number of tags that are going to tell us that, this is okay, there is another way to pronounce it, right? I don't, GrrCon, so someone else named it, right? And we'll see a couple other names there, and you see, tied back to BERSERK Bear from the crowdsourced intel. And the risk assessment we saw in the previous page. Know that, yeah, it's actually providing some remote access. It's fingerprinting the system, and we do actually see some interesting network activity, so we'll be able to drill into that. But this is also immediately correlated with our threat intelligence. So part of that report is what we've already been able to learn about this threat actor, including the attribution. So this is actually coming back and saying, by the way, we've seen this before, we know it, this is BERSERK Bear. It's part of that GrrCon family. Here are some related hashes, and then here's the URLs where we've actually seen, which are useful not just because maybe I want to block these IPs. They're probably down already, right? But the format here is actually really interesting because this almost certainly points to the threat actor using a strategic web compromise on ASP servers. Right? Just by the way they're trying to hide that URL format, it's almost certainly where they're hiding that call home. And then we were also able to correlate with some open source intelligence. So we'll give you the links here to the US CERT has a report on this particular threat actor and this malware, since it has been so commonly affecting the a couple different industries that have reported on it. And we'll go back through and search Malquery for a few interesting things here. You see it identify a number of different interesting things, like some URLs here, that actually come back with 0. So that in and of itself, the particular and it turns out to be incredibly specific call home that this piece of malware had was unique. It didn't find anything else in there, but it did extract a bit of code that I determined was semi-unique and searched the malware database for that. We found at least 100 samples there. 75 are already malicious, so we can drill into that. So now we have not just the one malware sample from where it turned up on the endpoint, but 100 other ones, related from the same threat actor. So we can take a look at how that's changed over time. We can take a look at how the C2 has changed, right? We had unique URLs here, so we want to take a look at how those are changing from looking at the related samples. And if you want to try that out, the automated portion of this is pretty confidential. But if you haven't checked out a hybrid analysis lately, and I mean I want to say week, you can now search hybrid analysis database with a YAR rule. So if you have a YAR rule, if you are tracking anything particularly interesting, you can plop that YAR rule directly into hybrid analysis. It will come back with the malware samples that we have. So that is again, now being rolled into the free version of hybrid analysis. So here in the paid version, we're generating those YAR rules automatically, and there's some secret sauce that goes into that. But if you are looking at anything particularly interesting on your endpoint, if you are digging into particular threat intel, take that YAR rule and try it out in hybrid analysis. Again, you get like 50 samples a day or whatever it is for free. So check that out, because that is a malware, massive malware database that you're all welcome to use, at least in that somewhat limited capacity. Before we'll start sending sales guys around with brochures and see if you want to upgrade, right? But check out the free version, and then again we'll be able to drill into the behavioral indicators and see how we're actually doing it. So we've actually identified, it's calling out to a URL that was previously identified as bad. We had a YAR signature match. So again, we will correlate with all of the threat intelligence that CrowdStrike has, and that includes our analysts had already turned around, analyzed this before. They had already turned out YAR rules to look for this type of malware. That's already embedded into this Falcon sandbox. So we're getting that alert there. Or we look at the suspicious indicators. I suppose that's a little small on the screen. I apologize for that. But it is able to look at some fairly interesting things. The way it's profiling, the good, again, like we saw in the last one, is checking for debug information, which not necessarily malicious, but not that common in production software. It's checking out certain registry keys. We see different IP addresses in memory that look kind of suspicious. It's importing suspicious APIs and a number of other things that look pretty fishy. Right? And now we can key on that and actually drill in to see, okay, what's this malware up to? It will also show screenshots. It's not that interesting in this case. It fires off a command shell, so you get like a little pop-up here. And but I'll throw it up there because sometimes it's interesting, particularly for malicious documents. It's interesting to see the malicious document open up and see what the first page is, at least in the screenshots, if you don't have like a safe environment in the lab to open up a doc yourself. So those make for interesting screenshots. I'll call it out just because it's actually not that common, right? Most malware doesn't do anything on the screen. So the screenshot section in the sandbox report is usually pretty empty. In this case, we got a quick pop-up. And I can go back and take a look at that process tree and see what all it's doing on the endpoint. So the way it's loading that ntdll.exe after it drops it, we do see it do a single ping to 127.0.0.1, which again I'd suggest is a pretty interesting threat hunting queue. I would turn around and search for that in my environment. I don't know how common that is. There might be a legitimate software that does that as a way to see if the interface is up, or I don't know what. But it seems to be actually just ping, forget the address, like an N, -N1. That's something I've done threat hunting with in the past. I don't know why malware thinks he'll send like just one ping. Like they're real conservative with their pings. Like they watch a lot of Hunt for Red October and think like more than a few would give it away. But you do see malware do that a lot, like one ping. Usually out to like Google DNS or something like that. It's a check to see like, am I online? In this case, the home interface for some reason, right? And then you actually see it at the registry here. So again, it's something I might want to key off and search the rest of the environment for. And of course, that in of itself will provide strict as well as broad IOCs. And we see that once we correlate with a threat intel, we're actually going from 7 file hashes to 32 before digging into the related samples and things we can pull down. So it makes for a pretty interesting sample. It's just it's a downloader. It was written in Go. A simple dropper installs it. And we take a look at the network activity. There's some pretty interesting stuff there, because while it does download payloads in an encrypted fashion, the C2 is in plain text, which is great to know because it actually made it a lot easier for us to write snort/suricata rules in order to identify that traffic. Now, I got to cherry pick my examples. I had a lot of fun with the bit payment ransomware, and if I can throw up some nation-state level malware, that's pretty fun stuff for me. But it's not exactly a normal day in the life of an analyst, is it? So what I want to do is also run through it with a random dropper, like what's a random piece of malware look like. And the random piece of malware, if you were to select one at random from what you have running in your company, probably not a bear, right? I like to run through the example, sure, but what happens if we see something a little less interesting? Well, I grabbed a random dropper and then ran that on the endpoint. And then we can go and again take a look at the sandbox analysis. So, all right, what malicious indicators do I get from the average dropper? None. All right, well, let's drill in a little bit more. How about suspicious indicators? What do I get? It imports suspicious APIs. It's not a lot. I'm not even sure if it used them. Actually, once I went through the entire report, it was pretty clear it didn't actually do any of these things. But you do see it load the libraries for, like sleeping, getting file names and addresses. There's the socket library. So we see, it's going to start doing some networking. But again, that's just loading the APIs. I don't even know if it really did anything interesting. Okay, but I got some networking activity. So let's take a look at the networking activity. What does it do? Well, it tries to call home and nobody picks up. So a bit anticlimactic, but it really proves to be fairly boring. And in fact, it makes for maybe a lousy example to get on stage and show everyone. But again, the purpose of doing this is not just to find the uber sexy malware. It's to be able to identify how much do I have to care about this malware. What is it doing and what's going on there? So while I can tell you, okay, we figured out it's malicious, we're not super confident. We got IOCs, I guess. And I can actually compare it with others. We see related files, so I can pull back those hashes and actually expand. So if you're worried about this malware, we'll give you more threat intel about it. But even that's an if. Right? Because at the end of the day, we're already showing, okay, well, hey, didn't Falcon block this? And the answer is yes. That's how we found it in the first place. Okay, and from the sandbox analysis, I learned that if it had run, even though it didn't, it wouldn't have actually done anything interesting, right? Because it wants to get instructions from home. Home was shut down a long time ago, so it's effectively impotent. So yeah, it can't actually do anything that interesting. So see you Monday. That's an important result too. Yeah, I'd like to show you the flashy stuff, but what's far more important is that I'm able to answer those questions directly. How does this malware affect me? If it wasn't blocked, how much do I have to worry? What are they trying to do? And we can answer those questions. And more often than not, the answer is this is some commodity stuff. That doesn't know who you are. It doesn't know who your company is. It's not after your IP. It's after you as much as it's after my grandma. Doesn't really know who it's going after. And being able to know that is, it's dramatically going to shorten the analyst cycle. I'm probably going to spend a lot less time on this one than something more interesting, something more active, something more dynamic, where I can plug in and actually see what's happening there, right? All right. So those are the examples I wanted to run through, and we have a little bit of time. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those as well. And if you don't want to shout it out, I'll be around after this as well. All right. If you have any other questions or want to see this live, let us know. Otherwise, you can see about 80% of this functionality in hybridanalysis.com for free. So check that out. Sign up for an account if you haven't. We'd love to see people using that tool as well. And thank you for coming. Picture of my puppy eating Fancy Bear. Thank you. Oh, just a pause? Oh, so ping and, so it waits for that to finish to do the next one? That makes sense.